Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Life Up Podcast. Welcome back for another deep dive with us. We got some really cool stuff from you guys this time.
Yeah, a bunch of different stuff. Historical articles, psychology pieces, even some economic analysis.
It's kind of all over the place, but in a good way, you know?
I think the common thread is this idea of trying to understand, like, what are the fundamental truths about human behavior and, how the world works.
Yeah. Beyond just, today's news or what happened this week, right? Like, what are those deeper patterns that we see play out over and over?
Right, exactly. And I think that's where this connects back to that book, Same as Ever, by Morgan Housel, which we talk about a lot.
Love that book.
Yeah. So this is kind of like taking some of those ideas and then expanding on them, using all these other resources that you guys have sent in.
Right. So think of it like extracting, those timeless lessons, those insights, the things that still hold true.
Regardless of the specific, events or technologies or whatever's happening on the surface.
Right. Okay, so let's dive in. I think one of the things that Housel really explores in the book, and that we see coming up in a lot of the material that you sent in, is this idea of the illusion of change. We get so focused on the new iPhone or the latest crisis, but are we really that different underneath it all?
Right. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and think that everything's changing so rapidly, but then you look back at history and you see these same patterns repeating themselves.
It's like that Carl Jung quote, right? The wise in all ages have always said the same thing, and the fools, who at all times form the immense majority, have in their way too acted alike and done just the opposite.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Love that quote. It's so true. Like, human nature, it doesn't really change that much.
Right. And then Schopenhauer, he basically said the same thing, right? Like, the fundamentals of human nature, our desires, our fears, our motivations, they're constant threads throughout history.
And then there's Voltaire. He had that famous line, history never repeats itself. Man always does.
Right. So it's not the exact events that repeat, but it's the way we react to them, the patterns in our behavior.
And I think that's where the real value lies. It's not about predicting the future, because that's often impossible.
Right. Yeah. It's more about understanding human nature and anticipating how people might react in different situations.
Exactly. Like Jane McGonigal said, to develop foresight, you need to practice hindsight. If you understand those timeless human responses, it gives you a huge advantage in navigating the future.
It's like that Naval Ravikant idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
He talks about wanting to be successful in 999 out of 1,000 parallel universes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that.
You don't do that by chasing the latest fad, right? It's about focusing on those fundamental principles that hold true across different scenarios.
Exactly. It's about focusing on the things that are same as ever.
Now, speaking of things that are hard to predict, another big theme in Same as Ever, and something that comes up a lot in the material you sent, is this idea of the power of the unforeseen. Like, the events that really change the game are often the ones that catch us totally off guard.
Right. Like, Housel talks about that story of the avalanche in Squaw Valley, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. He went on a routine skiing trip, and then, boom, suddenly he's in a life or death situation.
Wow. You just never know what's going to happen.
Exactly. And it makes you think, like, what are those risks in our own lives that we just haven't even considered?
Right. And history's full of those moments, right? Like the Battle of Long Island.
Mm-hmm.
The wind prevented British reinforcements from landing, and that had this huge impact on the outcome of the battle.
Yeah. You think about something like the weather, Like, it just seems so random.
Yeah.
But it can have these massive unintended consequences.
Totally. Or the Lusitania. They shut down a boiler room to save money, and that led to a slight delay, which put the ship right in the path of a German U-boat.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's COVID-19, 9/11, Pearl Harbor, the Great Depression.
Right, all these huge events that nobody really saw coming.
And it's not just these big historical events, right? Like Houdini, the guy who was famous for escaping from dangerous situations, he died from a random punch to the stomach.
I know, right? It's ironic. He could handle all these planned risks, but the one thing he didn't see coming come out.
So I guess the takeaway here isn't to try and predict every possible thing that could go wrong, but to build resilience and adaptability into our lives.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we can't control everything that happens, but we can control how we respond.
This leads us to another interesting point that Housel brings up, which is the gap between our expectations and reality. He argues that our expectations can actually have a bigger impact on our happiness than our actual circumstances.
Right. Like, he talks about how people in the 1950s were objectively less wealthy than we are today, but they might have been happier.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
Well, for one thing, there wasn't this huge income inequality back then. People's expectations were more in line with what their neighbors had.
And there wasn't social media,
Oh, yeah.
constantly bombarding us with images of everyone else's perfect lives.
Exactly. So we end up comparing ourselves to this idealized version of reality, and it can make us feel like we're not good enough, even if we're doing okay objectively.
It's like that Will Smith quote about fame. He said something like, "Imagine the worst day of your life. Now multiply that by 10 and live it publicly for the rest of your life."
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And Naomi Osaka, the tennis player, she's talked about how winning Grand Slams didn't bring her the joy that she expected. So it's not just about material wealth, right? It's about managing our expectations in all areas of our life.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on to another big idea from Same as Ever. The nature of progress and setbacks.
Right.
Housel makes this point that significant progress often happens gradually through compounding, which makes it easy to miss.
Yeah, it's like that saying, good things come to those who wait.
But then on the flip side, things can unravel really quickly,
Oh, yeah.
like the collapse of Lehman Brothers or Enron.
Right. Those are classic examples of how years of progress can disappear overnight.
So it's kind of this asymmetry, right? It's complex to build something great, but it can be broken so easily.
And it takes a certain mindset to handle both the progress and the setbacks.
Right. Housel talks about this balance between optimism and pessimism.
Yeah.
You need the optimism to fuel your ambition, but you also need the pessimism to keep you grounded and aware of the risks.
And it's interesting how he points out that the American dream actually became more popular during the Great Depression.
Wow.
Like when things were really bad, people needed that sense of hope even more.
So maybe a little bit of delusional optimism is actually helpful sometimes.
Well, I think it's more about finding that balance between depressive realism, which can be paralyzing, and a healthy dose of hope.
Right?
Like Bill Gates is a great example. He's obviously a very optimistic guy, but he also keeps a huge cash reserve for his company, just in case.
That's smart.
Yeah. It's about being prepared for the worst while still striving for the best.
Okay, let's talk about another really fascinating idea from Same as Ever, the importance of imperfection.
Right.
Housel argues that trying to eliminate all inefficiency and redundancy can actually make us more vulnerable.
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive.
It is.
But if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense. Like over-specialization can be a death sentence if the environment changes.
Right.
But having some redundancy, some slack in the system, allows you to adapt.
And this applies to our own lives, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like sometimes wasting time can actually lead to our best ideas.
Totally. Like Housel talks about Amos Tversky and Mozart, these brilliant minds who often had their breakthroughs during periods of seemingly unproductive time.
So it's not always about being on all the time, right? Sometimes you need to step back and let your mind wander.
Yeah. And there's research that shows how things like walking or taking breaks can boost creativity.
And even in the business world, this idea of zero inefficiency can backfire.
Right. Like the supply chain issues during the pandemic. Everyone was so focused on just-in-time inventory and minimizing costs that when things went haywire, there was no buffer.
So the takeaway here is to embrace a little bit of imperfection.
Okay. Yeah, it's about recognizing that some redundancy and slack can actually make us stronger in the long run.
Okay, now let's talk about competitive advantage. Housel points out that most competitive advantages eventually fade.
Right. Like he uses the example of Sears.
Yeah.
This once dominant retailer that eventually went bankrupt.
So even the giants can fall.
Yeah. And there are a few reasons for that.
Like what?
Well, sometimes it's complacency. Companies get so successful that they stop innovating.
Right.
Or the world changes around them and they fail to adapt.
Yeah.
Or their skills become obsolete. Or sometimes it's just luck.
Right.
Like they were in the right place at the right time and then that advantage disappears.
It's like that Red Queen hypothesis, right?
You have to keep running just to stay in the same place.
So continuous improvement is key.
Absolutely. You
Yeah.
can't rest on your laurels.
Okay, now let's talk about the future. Housel makes this point that we consistently underestimate the power of innovation.
Right. Like even the smartest people in the past couldn't have imagined the world we live in today.
Yeah.
Think about Thomas Edison. He was a genius, but he still couldn't fully grasp the potential of future technologies.
It's so hard to see beyond the current paradigm, right?
Totally. Like, who could have predicted the impact of the internet or social media?
Yeah.
Facebook started as a way for college students to connect, And now it's this global force.
It's amazing.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think the key takeaway here is to be open to the possibility that the future will be way more amazing than we can currently imagine.
Okay, let's talk about one last big idea from Same as Ever, the power of incentives.
Oh, yeah. This is a big one.
Housel argues that incentives are the most powerful force in the world.
Absolutely. They drive human behavior in a way that nothing else can.
And when the incentives are strong enough, people can justify almost anything.
Right. Like Housel uses the example of that pizza delivery driver who became a subprime mortgage broker. He was making way more money, but he was also contributing to this huge financial crisis.
Right.
The incentives were so strong that they blinded him to the risks.
And it's not just about money, right?
Right.
Like the support that someone like El Chapo had in his community.
Right.
He was a criminal, but he also provided jobs and economic benefits.
So the incentives were aligned for people to support him, even if they didn't agree with everything he did.
It's a complex issue.
It is.
But I think the takeaway here is to always look at the incentives when trying to understand why people do the things they do.
Yeah. Incentives reveal the truth.
Okay, last but not least, let's talk about personal experience. Housel argues that nothing shapes our worldview more than what we've lived through.
Oh, yeah.
It's like that Harry Truman quote. The next generation never learns anything from the previous one until it's brought home with a hammer.
Right. You can tell people about the dangers of something, but they won't really get it until they experience it themselves.
And Housel shares that story about the German civilian who lived through the hyperinflation after World War I. That experience shaped their political views for the rest of their life.
Yeah. Like they saw firsthand how quickly things can fall apart, and they were willing to support anyone who promised stability, even someone like Hitler.
It's a reminder that our experiences, even the negative ones, shape who we are.
And it explains why people who've lived through different historical periods can have such different perspectives on the world.
Like someone who grew up during the Great Depression might be more cautious with their money than someone who grew up during a boom time.
Right. Or someone who's experienced war might have a different view on foreign policy than someone who hasn't.
So it's important to be aware of our own biases and to try to understand where other people are coming from.
Yeah. It's about empathy, recognizing that everyone has their own story, their own set of experiences that have shaped their worldview.
Okay, so to wrap things up, I think the big takeaway from Same as Ever and all the material you sent in is that while the world is constantly changing, there are certain fundamental truths about human behavior and how the world works that remain constant.
Yeah. Like human nature is same as ever.
Right. And those timeless truths can give us a deeper understanding of the present and a better sense of how to navigate the future.
Absolutely. It's about seeing beyond the headlines and understanding the underlying patterns.
So as we end this deep dive, we want to leave you with a question to ponder. Which of your current assumptions might be based on temporary trends rather than those same as ever principles?
That's a good one.
And what might happen if those trends were to shift?
It's a question worth thinking about.
It is. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
We'll see you next time.
Yes.